Hey, sorry I didn't do a video during Worlds. It was traveled a lot more than I thought, changing hotels more than I expected, etc., etc. But I am doing a video now that Worlds has ended because there's a topic that's actually been bugging me and I hear it a lot, which is that SK Telecom winning everything is boring, which that way of thinking itself is boring, and it reflects a gross mishandling of the narrative itself by perhaps myself, Riot, other people in the profession that I have, etc., etc. So I'd really like to tackle some of the ideas that people are putting forward as to why the SKT winning everything narrative is boring, because it's really easy to fall into the pit of, oh, the story's always the same, we know these players, they don't talk, etc., etc. So I'm going to first tackle the low-hanging fruit, which is the idea that SK Telecom and their players themselves are boring. They really aren't. It's actually kind of phenomenally strange that we've started to think that. I think part of the reason we think that is that when they do interviews, they're very, very closed off in a way. And this was true especially in 2013 when the Western audience was first introduced to them. As time progressed and we saw more of this iteration of SK Telecom, and when I refer to SK Telecom, I'm referring to Faker's SK Telecom. There were historical iterations, of course, with different rosters, but when we think about SK Telecom now, we think of Faker. No matter how the roster changes, what players are on it, we often think of Faker. So this is what I refer to when I say the SK Telecom roster, because they also have a very similar identity. And the idea that the players and the storylines themselves of this roster are boring to Western audience or can't be entertaining to a Western audience, or it's not as exciting if a Western team would win because we see Western teams stream and they have personalities. This is like utterly bullshit. Let's talk about Bang & Wolf's rise, the fact that they're just comfortable playing each other, the fact that if you ask one of them what it's like or what they would imagine it would be like to not play together, they actually just can't even think about it. It doesn't occur to them because they've always played together. The idea that Bang himself has become like a much more defined player. He's kind of cleaned himself up. He's had a journey there that I don't think has really been explored satisfactorily in a Western audience, but it's definitely something that we can talk about more. It's like Bang's identity as a player, because he's come a long way. Like if you watched him in SK T1S, it was like this is not a good bot lane, but they've really found a way to work around the flaws that they have. And they do have some laning phase related flaws, things like that. I think that Wolf's champion pool is much more suited to mages, but he's not necessarily a good laner, so he has to roam, which is a little bit awkward for him, but it works out. Anyway, they have a lot of charisma, especially we've seen Wolf a lot more recently kind of take things out. And this year, I guess, at MSI, when Wolf really wanted Shox to interview him, we have like a hint of his charm and wittiness, right, coming through, where he has the balls, first of all, to hit on Shox, and the social grace to make it not seem weird, because I don't advocate just like randomly hitting on Shox. There's like a good way to do it and a not good way to do it, and I always kind of veer towards the latter, sorry Shox, because I do not have Wolf's social graces and charisma. Just throwing that out there. Like these players themselves are interesting. Like Wolf, you always constantly see pictures of him with holding his hand like this. I don't know what it's called, but he seems like a really fun, likable guy. And we had a snippet, I should say, of Tom, the ex-sub jungler, talking a little bit about these players, what they're like in solo queue. There's information out there on these guys. Duke's story. He had a big struggle joining SK Telecom because SK Telecom is a much more communicative team than he's used to. You still see him defaulting just towards split pushing, and he struggles with that a lot. Like the idea of this communication issue is difficult for him. So when you talk about teleports, like there's definitely a story there to talk about his personality, his mindset, the way he's thinking about the game, and the way he's working with the team that people don't. I mean, it's there. Like, people have written about it. I have colleagues who write about these players that I've worked with. Emily Rand, Tyler, sorry, I'm not going to say your last name, Fiona on Fire, both have done a really, really good job of writing about SKT, of writing about these players. Like, this information is out there if you're interested in their personalities, and they do a very good job of conveying, of building the sense of definedness, like, all of these sorts of things. And, of course, you have the central figures, right? You have Bengi and Faker, who have been part of this roster forever. Benki is kind of this guy. It's like he's happy-go-lucky. He's borne the brunt and the blame of a lot of things, but people put him as like the Robin to Faker's Batman. But you kind of have to wonder, like, how does this guy struggle with wanting to play the game as much as Faker? Is there a struggle within the SKT organization? Why did they bring in another jungler? What are we doing with this? Like, he definitely has his own story that's worth telling, that's worth talking about, and it's not boring. Like, his journey is very interesting because the idea that you have them just first picking Nidalee because they kind of have to, and then even that was a mistake because they could have first picked Ashe instead. Things like this. These guys are fallible and interesting, and it's really curious to think about their mindset and the way this is played, and it's frankly rude not to. Especially if you think about Faker. A lot of people see his story as he's a bit charmed, you know, he's always been good at the game, but this guy also works really hard, obviously. The other thing is that he's pretty precise and calculated in the way he moves, so I think a lot of people think of Faker as this guy who's just very detached from reality anyway. He just focuses on his game, doesn't have a social life, this guy actually has a pretty charming personality that's developed over the years as he's grown more popular, as he's become interested in interacting with his fans and what his fans say about him. He's definitely a cocky little shit, like, but he deserves to be, right? I mean, he's a really great player and he's made an effort to be sociable and amiable in the way he presents himself. He made an effort to learn English. Like, he obviously cares about what the fans think about him in a way, and he wants to put on a show. He wants to be the charismatic, like, best player in the world that people are looking for him to be. But ultimately, if you think that still think they're boring, you either haven't done a good job of looking around for information on them or researching what they look like, or blame Riot, right? Blame me. Blame Emily Rand. Blame Fiona on Fire. Blame Thorn. Blame whoever you want to blame who's supposed to be bringing you this content that they're not bringing you, which, I mean, I think I've done... I could do a better job, for sure, personally, talking about these teams, the way they play, the way they act, etc. That's interesting. Blame us. Don't blame SKT. SKT aren't boring. That's actually absurd. And then, of course, earlier on in the back, when they were more reserved about what they said, when they were maybe slightly less at ease, like, they were getting to know us. We're getting to know them. We're getting increasingly more comfortable with them. It's like making friends, almost. And that's actually really cool to see these guys each year. If you don't watch LCK, right, then you don't get as much exposure to them, but you kind of get to say hi every year, and they're making an effort to say hi every year, and they're saying more and more comfortable, cocky sorts of best team in the world types of things, because they are no longer... We're no longer in that awkward, like, first date period where we're afraid of rejection or saying something dumb, etc. We're starting to actually get to know them. So it's actually good that we see them all the time, that they're part of, like, the family in the League of Legends scene that has developed. As we get further into this, we get to kind of the more meatier stuff that I like to write about, or that I have conveyed, or that is more important to me, because I don't do as much of the player story side, etc., etc. I think there are people who are doing a fantastic job of it, so I focus more on stuff that I am more experienced in, that people think of me for, which is like how SKT play the game being boring or one-dimensional. And I am actually kind of guilty of saying this, maybe not publicly, but privately. They don't change their style that much. They play around Faker. Faker's agency is kind of what dictates the pace of the game, where he is on the map, what he decides to do, and they give up not so much resources, because they will have the jungler gank the side lanes. When Bengi plays, it's very much about tracking the enemy jungler and knowing where he is and giving the lanes the agency to do what they want. This is something that's been very, very typical of SKT forever, with Faker controlling most of the map control and, like, having this idea of what he wants to do, and the team being dictated almost by how well he does. This is, first of all, actually a bad way to build your team. You don't build your team around one guy doing well, like SKT do. But they do. They do this because they get away with it because Faker is good. And that's actually really interesting, watching this team play develop. Because this year I didn't think it would be as successful, because I thought the agency of the jungler would be really huge. But if you watch the way Faker positions, the way he uses the map, he makes it work. And SKT make it work with him. And it's really, really exciting to see the slight tweaks that they make. These sorts of things are really interesting and could be talked about a lot more. So I think it's a little unfair to say that SKT's play style is boring when they do make little changes, and you can talk about their execution of simple things being really, really good. Now, of course, I can say all this until I'm blue in the face, but people want their teams to win. And after a while, it gets discouraging. It's like it's always going to be like this, right? SKT is always going to win everything. League of Legends has this limited lifespan, and no one's ever going to catch up. Not even the Korean teams can catch up anymore. SKT won every single international event this year. The problem with that idea is that it's kind of weak-minded and resigned in a way. And there's a different way to look at SKT that makes them really exciting, and the fact that they win every event really exciting. And that's that they give us something to aim for. Everyone has heroes. Everyone has people they want to be like, people they look up to. And it's not that they want to be that person, but they eventually get to this point where you can do better, right? No one ever wants to exactly be their heroes. They want to kind of be inspired by them to a point where they're better than them. I mean, it's human nature to want to be the best. It's not cocky to say I want to be better than my idol. It's not cocky to say that I want to be better than someone I look up to. SKT is that in a lot of ways for teams. No one's gonna play exactly like SKT or try to be exactly like SKT. But to be inspired by SKT and what they can achieve and think that I can do that too is really, really exciting. And I don't think teams talking to them have resigned themselves. And we can make fun of them every year when they say, I think we can really do it this year. Maybe it's a bit short-sighted, but it signifies that they haven't given up. So the fact that the fans are saying things like SKT winning every year is boring. I mean, when someone eventually beats SKT, be it another Korean at an international event like this again, be it a Korean team, or disrupts the dynasty, more importantly. Because people have kind of beaten SKT in here or there, but it's like consistently being able to get them down. Someone who's just really a consistent competitor for them. It's going to be really exciting, because it's like you finally reached a point where you've caught up to this team that always seems to be one step ahead of everyone. And that's really cool. That's something to aspire to, and that's inspiring and exciting for me to watch as a storyline, because I'm not gonna say that next year someone's gonna beat SKT, or this year someone could necessarily beat SKT. Like, they were even underdogs going into this tournament. Like, let's talk about that. It was exciting to see SKT adapt, and the fact that they were actually underdogs for once. Next year, they probably won't be underdogs again, unless there's a huge, massive roster change and Faker leaves, etc., etc. But they probably won't be viewed as underdogs, and people will be aiming to best them. People will be aiming to play against them, and I don't want this to be a super villain final boss type storyline, because I think that's a simplification as well. They aren't villains. They're people who work hard. They achieve something. They go out of their way to be better, to be the best. And that doesn't make them villains. It makes them competitors. And the moment we start looking at them like competitors instead of villains, the moment that we can actually really respect for them and appreciate what they've achieved and appreciate what they can do and what potentially the rest of the teams that people support do, or me as someone who isn't going to compete in a video game, but me who wants to make better content, who wants to write better things, to understand the game better, to think about these issues better. This is inspiring even to me. So that's why I think it's really exciting to have a team like SK Telecom. I think League of Legends is lucky to have a team like SK Telecom and a player like Faker that wins everything. And I just to me saying it's boring really undersells what this story and what this idea and what people in the community could see it as. So, thanks for watching. You can go ahead and subscribe to the theScore eSports YouTube channel, and please remember to download the app. Thanks. Bye.